Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our Academic Affairs Committee meeting for the Board of School Directors in Springfield Township. I'm Damian Johnston. I'm the Assistant Superintendent and your host for this evening's meeting. I am pleased to welcome you to our annual data presentation and academic achievement presentation. We've been doing this consistently since the pandemic to really make sure that we've provided an overview to our members of our school board and all our stakeholders of how our students are doing, our areas of strength, our areas where we can grow, and our action plans. And so if it's okay with all of you, we'll go ahead and get started. All right. Oh, wait, I gotta click this over here. So our agenda for this evening is really focused on academic performance. We really wanted to prioritize your time and make sure that we had plenty of time for any questions that you may have throughout our time together. I please ask you to pause us if you have questions or want clarification or want to discuss a slide any further. We're happy to do that from our team. Otherwise, we'll just continue onward. We're going to start with an overview. We want to talk about framing the data, like what it means for us here and what we've chosen to share with you. Additionally, we'll talk about district-wide performance. We'll talk about disaggregating the data, one of the important features that is new for us this year to really do that publicly and talk about that. Our building administrators are all with us this evening, and they'll provide a report on the building level point of view, sort of their areas of strength, where we are, and how they're focusing their work this year, and then we'll wrap up. Again, as I said, the purpose of our time together tonight is to really make sure that we've provided clarity to our stakeholders on how we're doing. Every school district has areas of strength and areas where they can grow, and we want to make sure that you're well aware of what we see those as being in the realm of academics. We are excited to share that with you because we've seen some real gains in the past year. There's still areas that we really want to target and focus in on. So ultimately, I hope you leave this evening with an update and a report on our key areas of student achievement. We are focusing on ELA, math, and science this evening. We'll share with you our action plans for growth and what we're doing. And then we'll take a look at how students are doing through the lens of disaggregation and really what are the systemic and instructional barriers that we may be having students that are there experiencing, and what can we do to eradicate those or start to poke at them to make it better. As you know, our team is here this evening, along with our 3 members of our school board and our 2 student representatives. I'm pleased to welcome Dr. Markle, Mr. Spiker, Dr. Fuller, and Dr. Rittenhouse to be with us this evening also. They always add some levity and joy to our work and keep us focused on what's happening at the building level for actual kids. So I'm excited they could be with us this evening, so thank you all. I think one of the things that's really important to our team, and we want to make sure that we focused in on, is that there are school districts and my colleagues across the county, the state, the nation, who focus on a score as whether or not we're doing a good job. And the score and the number is what people care about the most. And I think one of the things that's exciting about our community here is that assessment is a piece of the story for a student. But the reason that we provide assessments and the reason we look at these measures is not solely about the score, but the score provides us neutral way to interpret how we're doing in our curriculum, how we've aligned it to the standards, and then ultimately the way we're providing instruction to our students and what is working for them or not working that we need to revisit. And that then when we provide the next assessment, we're able to see, did the measures we put in place in the targeted way we moved forward help students in the curriculum and in their instruction to do better on the next assessment? All of which is necessary for us to realize our vision of our profile of a graduate. I'm going to pause here just to make sure you took note of our new profile of a graduate image. We have updated it, so I'm excited to share it with you, and I have stickers for all of you next time I see you at a board meeting. Very exciting. So anyway, all that to say, the profile of a graduate and what we believe about student achievement is grounded in not only assessment, but the planning of our curriculum and then our delivery of our instruction. Assessment, so in this point of view, assessment is formative and summative assessments that we use to help us understand how students are learning in novel contexts. How are they doing when they independently need to assign and practice a skill and show mastery towards something? How does that inform our curriculum, which is the overall scope, sequence, and planned instruction we plan for children at each grade level? And then ultimately, the instructional practices used by our faculty and staff that break down that curricular components into digestible pieces and provide them with students in order to assess their learning. And then that cycle repeats itself. Is that making sense? Okay. So said another way, we analyze the performance on those assessments as a way to examine our effectiveness in curriculum and instruction, right? So how are we doing? We know that based on how we do in the assessments. So that's not to say that the assessment scores aren't important to us. Rather, I would tell you that they're greatly important, but they're important in the context of helping us do a better job to more adequately and appropriately educate our students and our learners. I am going to invite my team to interrupt at any point when they want to add anything. So I forgot to say that too. Hi, Dr. Yannico. So when we talk about examining the data, we're going to do that in 3 different ways. One is across the district. How are we doing broadly on these measures to tell us what our district areas of strength or needs are, be that in curriculum, instruction, or on the assessment? And then our building leaders look not only at how we're doing by the district, but then they come and look at it more closely at a more granular level by the building. And ultimately, one of the things that's been really important in this since the pandemic, but definitely in the last year, is really bringing those data back to the grade level or the department to really focus on where are our students really knocking it out of the park. They're doing really well on these particular skills or these particular pieces of concept or content. These are areas where we're not quite hitting the mark. How can we tweak our instruction or our curriculum to better align for our students? So at the student level, how they are individually doing happens on a regular basis with the building principal, with their faculty. From a district level, I work on that with our administrators to look at our district operations. So a couple of clarifying points before I put some numbers and grids and graphs in front of you. One is that we have selected to focus this evening on our high stakes measures. Those are our PSSAs and our keystones. And the reason we wanted to really focus in on those pieces is those are the ones that get publicly published, right? That's where our FRI data or our school rankings comes from. Behind the scenes, I want to assure you, and our principals will talk about that, they have administered other measures as well, and they'll talk about that with you in their action plans. But these big measures are the ones we wanted to share with you so that you could see where are those rankings coming from and how are we doing. The data I'm going to share with you this evening is really around grade levels or departments and not cohorts. So I'm going to show you, for example, 4th grade's data over the past 5 years. That doesn't tell you about how a group of 4th graders who are now in 7th grade have done. We have different data to look at that. This is just a snapshot of how we are doing on the algebra keystone at the middle school, the biology keystone at the high school, so that you can see over the past 5 years. And while we are sharing with you 5 years of data, it's actually a 6-year period, because I'm going to remind you that we did not administer any of these assessments during the pandemic in the 19-20 year. So you'll see that there are data from 17-18 up to 22-23, because there's a gap missing because we don't have data for 2019-2020. That was a lot for me to say in one sentence. I'm going to take a breath. Okay, are we good? All right, so here's our first slide with a whole lot of purple. Purple in this context, these slides came to us from our data warehouse, that's Linkit. So this is ELA, achievement and growth, over the past 5 years at each grade level. So across the axis, you'll see grade 3 for 5 years, grade 4 for 5 years. Is that making sense? And at the very last column is all grades 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. This is PSSA. And so you'll see that we talk about our performance as pre-pandemic and post-pandemic, right? So this is the second full year. These results are the second full year of uninterrupted schooling. So you can see that across the board for the majority of our performance, there has been an uptick since the year before. We continue to notice the same patterns nationally and locally. My colleagues who do this work in Montgomery County and across Pennsylvania, as well as what I've read about nationally, our results are very in line with other entities. Students have had some regression, but are recouping, and I would tell you we're recouping at a quicker rate than some of our counterparts, but there are still areas where we see concern, primarily at our years of transition. 3rd and 6th grade continue to be ones we want to pay attention to. Something is happening where we see a real drop, and then you see them bounce back in 4th and 7th. How do we sort of level that out and maintain their performance year to year? So that's something we're looking at from a district-wide perspective. Is there anything we can do to help address that? Questions about ELA? Okay. Same idea, same concept, same setup. This is mathematics, grades 3 through 8. Again, you'll see that we are in some areas just not back to where we were pre-pandemic. I will tell you that across the Commonwealth, mathematics scores are low. The state average is low, is well below our averages. We talked about that a lot last year. I still can't quite tell you why that is, except there's a misalignment between the test and the standards and the way people are the results that are coming out of the test. That said, we still want to do our best. And so we're digging in on particular areas of strength and need from a mathematics curriculum. Our math instructional coach has been working with grade level at grades 3, 4, and 5, and 6, 7, and 8 to take a look at these data and figure out where do we have some room where we could shift instructional practice or focus in order to yield better results. Questions on mathematics? Okay. Historically, we have done well with our science performance. This is science grades 4 and 8. We only administer those tests those 2 years. Not new to this board and this group of people. You remember that we have new state STEELS standards. This is still the test on the old standards, and the test for the new standards won't come out until 2025. Next year, we are going to start to pilot with the Pennsylvania Department of Ed, administering the new assessment in grades 4 and grade 5. No, Ben, what did I say? It's actually in grade 5. The current 3rd graders will take it as 5th graders, right? So the state is rolling out a plan for the new assessment. Questions for me about science? Okay. Then we're going to take a look at Keystone data. So this is the Keystones that are administered. In the first column, quite a rainbow of selections here. Literature, which is administered and following the 10th grade ELA course. Algebra 1 for those who have taken it at the middle school. Algebra 1 for those who have taken it at the high school. And biology, which is a high school course most often taken by 10th graders. It is of no surprise to anyone on this call, because we've talked about it for the past year, that we continue to have concerns around the performance of our students who take algebra when they take it as 9th graders. And when we've dug into that data, Dr. Fuller and I and Dr. Rittenhouse continue to work at the patterns, noticing the students who are taking algebra as 9th graders were not producing proficient results in their mathematics in 6th or 7th or 8th grade either, or they were on the bubble or the cusp. They were just proficient. So we're digging in a little bit to try to figure out how to enhance their performance all along with more abstract thinking. So we're looking at both curriculum and instructional practice, because these results continue to be of concern to us if they take algebra in the high school. Obviously, if they are taking algebra in an accelerated way at the middle school, they are doing quite well. And biology continues to hold steady in the 68 to 65% proficient and advanced. Does anyone have any questions on Keystone results? Okay. Again, no surprise to anyone in this group was it's not enough, though, anymore for us to say, here's how our whole school is doing. We have promised, as a part of our goals for this year, we committed to one another that we would begin to tease apart the performance of our subgroups of students, to take a look at how some groups of students are doing compared to others. And are we making sure that students are performing equitably across these measures? And so we committed, as a part of our annual planning for the district goals, to really take a look at creating action steps of building-based data teams, taking a look at how disaggregated data plays out, not only on standardized measures, but also on measures that are administered in a curricular or classroom-based measure. We want to make sure that we create action plans based on this and then report out to all of you and the public in the winter and the spring actions toward this progress towards our action steps and our plans. And then ultimately, we want to continue to provide disaggregated data results at the end of the year in spring of 2024. So when we started to look at disaggregated data, we wanted to make sure we had some common definitions of what that meant. We really wanted to look at our overall performance and then how that performance for some students compared to that performance for other groups of students. So we looked at our data through the lens of gender, race, socioeconomic status, special education eligibility, and English language learners. Why did we want to do that? Because we want to figure out what strategies or barriers in our curricular and instructional practices may be resulting in our students not doing as well, therefore impacting their long-term success and readiness for post-secondary options. So when we look at the PSSA results by program, and so by program means free and reduced lunch or those students who experience economic disadvantages, our English language learners is ELL, special education students, and those in our general education. So those students who are not in those other programs. So across the board, students who are not in those programs are demonstrating 76% of their skills, are demonstrating proficient and advanced in their ELA skills, compared to only 43% of the students who utilize free and reduced lunch are proficient and advanced. So a significant lack of performance for those students. Does that make sense? Okay. Math, the same way, the results are organized the same way. And you can see sort of how our students are doing. So 31% of those who experience economic disadvantage are proficient and advanced, as compared to 63% of the students who do not experience that. These are again our PSSA results. In science,
I have a question.
Sure, of course, Kay.
I
Yes,
see
Dr.
you
Adlin.
have disaggregated the data based on free and reduced lunch, our English language learners, spec ed, and compared to the general ed. One of your points was gender and race. Did you disaggregate those areas as well?
We did, and I realized right now as we're presenting it that I have a couple of slides that explains why we focused on free and reduced lunch or economic disadvantage, but I put them after these slides instead of before. Okay. So give me 1 minute and then I want to circle back and then talk about that.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. So here's this group, and this is science performance on the PSSA. And this is performance by program on the keystones. And this is the keystone in literature. This is the keystone in Algebra 1 at the I've taken at the middle school. This is the program proficiency taken if algebra is taken at the high school. And this is biology. So ultimately, when we took a look at the performance of our data, our performance data, one of the things that came out was that our students who were experiencing economic disadvantage was one of the largest percentages of student groups in our school district. It comprises 23% of our student body. Now, remember, the one thing we know is that families who are identified as experiencing economic disadvantage are those who disclose that information by participating in other programs, like free and reduced lunch. If a family is experiencing economic hardship in their home and doesn't seek out free and reduced lunch, we're not accounting for them. So it's at least 23% of our student body whose children and family are experiencing economic disadvantage in their home. When we dug into who those children were, who are that 23%, 75% of our students who are English language learners are also economically disadvantaged. When we dug into our performance about those who are Hispanic, 55% of our students who are Hispanic are also economically disadvantaged. So groups are not so singularly identified. And so, yes, Dr. Edlin, we did look at race, but what we noticed was race and economic status was highly correlated for us. And we really wanted to pay attention to when 46% of our students who are Black are also economically disadvantaged, taking a look at best practices for those students who experience economic disadvantage would get us sort of and that extra value added, right? If we're able to address it for a subgroup, it will be beneficial to other subgroups. Does that help answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Are there other questions around sort of who our students are who are economically disadvantaged and why we focused for our first, that we want to make sure we focus on that group? Okay. So as I said to you, economic disadvantage also includes those families who utilize temporary assistance supplemental services from the county or from the state, those children who are living in institutions, for those that for neglected or delinquent care. If you receive foster care, you could potentially be included in this group as well. It used to just be free and reduced lunch eligibility, but the program definition has expanded from the Commonwealth. One of the things that I think is important is that in doing some in enriching our understanding about sort of best practices, one of the things that's really important for us to think about is that as a school system, we only have but so much control over addressing the issues for families who experience that economic hardship, right? We are not going to be able to solve that by coming to school. But what we can do is recognize that we need to analyze our trends for students, see what is within the control of our schools, and then continue to utilize our clinical and support staff to build networks of support for those families within the community and really triangulate the support of not only the family, the school, and the community in wrapping around the child in order to help aim towards their success. We know we need to foster our understanding of instructional best practice and then take a look at the barriers. What are the kinds of things we might be doing or not doing that are causing students to not be as successful as they can be? So ultimately, there are instructional implications for us. What we know is that if we could continue to lean in and commit to our idea of universal design for learning, really recognizing that those are the services and supports and predicting those barriers, are most often effective in helping all kids or most kids learn and be successful. In a couple of minutes, I'm going to turn this over to our building administrators to provide their reports, but we have a tendency to use some educational jargon and buzz. And so we just wanted to make sure we all knew what we meant by some terms that might come up. So sometimes we talk about the bubble, and bubbles can be lots of things, but in this context, they are students who performed on the cusp of being proficient. There is a group of students who are really taking a look at who scored basic on their standardized testing, but are only a point or two or within a small zone of being able to address those deficits in order to move from basic to proficiency. So we talk about those as students who are on the bubble. We talk about tiers. I'm reminding you, we use a very solid MTSS program, multi-tiered systems of support here. Tier 1 is our core instruction, what we provide to all learners. Tier 2, targeted intervention. And Tier 3, really significant, pronounced intervention and supports for particular children with unique needs. I've mentioned to you before, we have a robust data warehousing program called Link It. Sometimes you'll hear us talk about Link It. That's what that is. And a TDA is a text-dependent analysis. It's students being expected to use text and do an analysis in writing of what is happening or what was inferred. And so we'll talk a little bit at different grade levels about what that has looked like. That is historically an area where we could grow, and our principals will share with you today about how that's been going for their buildings. Any questions for me?
Yes, I have one more. In your previous slide, one of the interventions that you'll be using to help to support the students, yes, here, the universal design for learning. Are there any consideration or inclusive in UDL? Will there be culturally responsive practices also being integrated?
Absolutely, Dr. Etlin. That is a huge part of the work. And I think that's where we really see success in our comprehensive plan, our equity plan, and this academic presentation to all of you, where we're really trying to braid those things together to make sure that we are doing the both and, right? Creating classrooms in which students can be successful by eliminating barriers, increasing their background knowledge, and allowing students to have the opportunity to share their personal stories and expertise and experiences in order to enrich their learning.
Okay, and one more question.
Please keep them
Also
coming.
inclusive in these instructional practices, will there be some time in devotion to including SEL as well?
As you know, we already spend a lot of time on social emotional learning in our school district. And so fortunately, we have those systems and programs built into our K-8 program, and we continue to provide opportunities for some of that work at the high school as well.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Other questions? Okay. I am excited to welcome Dr. Megan Markle, building principal at Enfield Elementary, to share her building report. Dr. Markle, you'll cue me when you're ready for slides advancement.
Yes, please. Hi, everybody. It's Dr. Markle here. It's nice to see you all. I'm very excited to share an update and an update from last year, and then really our projections for this year. And so just to start, we'll take a look at some of the focus areas that we wanted to concentrate from last school year. And so one big change we made last year was really having some content-focused grade level meetings, which means that our special area teachers, our reading specialists, and our math specialists had dedicated time with each grade level, and we had a rotation. And so grade level meetings happened each Thursday morning, but there was a rotation, and that really allowed for more cross-curricular conversations and just a more of a collaborative nature. And so we were really happy about implementing that. We're going to continue to do that this school year as well. Another great resource that we were able to acquire last year was our geodes. And so our geodes resource, they complement the work we're doing in phonemic awareness and phonics instruction, where we are really making sure we're doing a solid job of identifying isolated reading skills. But what we were finding is that we needed some more rich decodable text that not only support those isolated reading skills that we're working on, but that could allow students to have maybe a really authentic reading experience with some text in their hands. And so when we learned about geodes, we were really excited about that. And that's what geodes does for us. They provide resources that can really help increase our students' background knowledge, help with the vocabulary and other comprehension strategies. So we really feel like we're touching on all areas of reading instruction. So we were happy about that new resource, and we're looking to continue to use that this year. And then also a major step from last year is we had a new math specialist join our team last year. It was a former second grade teacher, and that was really instrumental in helping us to continue to look at our math practices, our math instruction, and our math data. And so I'll elaborate that a little bit more as we move forward, but ready for the next slide. So because of some of those focus areas that we worked on, I'm happy to just talk about some strengths so far that we're seeing for this 2023-2024 school year. And so we have a couple assessments that we do. We call them our benchmark assessments. We do them 3 times a year. It just gives us a nice pulse on how our students are doing. Obviously, we also use other assessments and other data to collect, but we right now are focusing on our benchmark assessments. And so in kindergarten, our students take a STAR reading assessment, and then we also have different Acadience reading assessments that they take. And I'm happy to report that in our kindergarten, we have 85% of our students that met or exceeded where they need to be right now in the fall benchmark time. And then the same thing with Acadience. 82% of our kindergarten students are showing that they're where they need to be or exceeding where they need to be. And so that's really allowing us to make sure that we can identify those kids who are doing great, and we're going to keep pushing them along, but then identify and support those students that we really need to hone in and provide some additional resources for. Same thing with first grade. 87% of our first grade students have met or exceeded that expectation for the fall. And then this for second grade, 81% of our students met or exceeded that expectation for Acadience. Any questions right now just about some of those percentages? So we'll take a look at that again in the winter and then also at the spring. So then after we took our benchmark assessments, that really helps us to determine where are our areas of growth. And so for Enfield, we've been doing a deep dive into our data. One thing that we're kind of amping up on those grade level meetings that I talked about is that now we're having some in addition to the content cross-curricular conversations we're having, we're also making sure that we're having some conversations about identifying targeted areas of focus for not only the entire grade, but for each specific class. And so teachers are really delving into their data to see where are the areas of strength, where are the areas of need that I can support not only my whole class as a whole, but individual students. And then, as you all know, kindergarten is such a monumental year for our students. So we want to just make sure that we're really focusing on our instruction, on those foundational skills that are so important. Our staff does a wonderful job of, learning about early literacy and fully supporting that. And we just know how important. And so we continue to have really great conversations and look at our best practices of how we can support our foundational skills in kindergarten. And then just as Dr. Johnston has talked a lot about, we're having a lot of conversations and looking at our students who are experiencing economic disadvantage. It's one thing to look overall as a whole school, as a whole grade, as a whole class, but also then looking individually at students. And so as a staff, we've been having data meetings with our data team, but then also at those grade level team meetings where classroom teachers are going to delve in and look at their data and make sure that we're providing the support to students that need that. And I think it's important to mention too that when we are looking at our data, we're identifying that we're identifying targeted support or strategies that are useful not only to our students that are experiencing economic disadvantage, but really those strategies are really good for most students as well. And so it's a nice collaboration or connection for that. Any questions for that so far? I'll keep going and then maybe more questions will come up. So really my action plan for this year, just as I talked about the data meetings, not only are we looking at individual class, but really whole school as well and whole grade level. And so we've comprised the data team. So we'll continue to look at trends and not only looking at academics, but looking at attendance. We have opportunities through our MTSS process as well, where teachers can bring us bring ideas or suggestions, or they need help with something. And so common themes come out of that too. And so we'll continue to have those conversations at grade level meetings as well. I want to touch base on our math interventions because last year was our first year with our math specialist. And last year we began intervention groups in January, but because we have this process that we really feel strongly about, we were able to begin our math intervention groups in October. And then same thing, one piece that was missing for us is that we needed a little bit more math data. And so we have implemented the Link It benchmark assessment, and that assessment gives us some really good data on math standards and how our students are doing, which then allows us to really identify how we're going to support our students moving forward. And then as always, which is really important, just looking at our intervention and support, making sure what we're doing at that tier 1 classroom level is working, but when it's not enough for some students, what tier 2 support can we provide? And so making sure that we're identifying those areas of need and then adding that tier 2 support for ELA and math. And that can come from classroom teachers, that can come from math specialists, that can come from reading specialists as well. Any questions for me?
Right. Thanks, Dr. Markle.
Thanks.
Passing the baton on to our newest colleague, Mr. Spiker is going to speak about his work at Erdenheim. Mr. Spiker.
I need to unmute myself before I start to talk, I guess. Thank you, Dr. Johnston. Hi, everybody. My name is Ben Spiker. I'm the new principal at Erdenheim. Next, I'd like to talk to you about the work we did last year, the results, and where we're focusing on this year. So last year, the team in place last year focused on a bunch of things. So first is just having really solid data analysis, having routines and structures where teachers and leaders looking at assessment results, diving into the data, refining our practices, making new small groups, and that's a routine and a practice that is sort of like very present and very strong at Erdenheim. The second thing that was new last year was similar to Enfield. We added a new position, the math specialist role, that that really works to both directly work with students at Tier 2 supports, but also to give additional support and resources and training to teachers as well. So those homeroom teachers had extra support to be the best math teachers possible for their homeroom students. And then the third thing that the team did last year was to look at those assessments, the PSSA, the STAR, the STAR assessments, and see what standards, what concepts do we really need to focus on most, and make some targeted plans to not just sort of to teach directly towards what's on the PSSA or STAR, but to really look to drill down to particular areas of need and to fold that into our instruction. So that's what the team was focusing on last year. As we look at our PSSA results from last year, results were up in ELA and in math on the PSSA. They were up especially high in math, which was great, but they're up in both. In particular, seeing some of that work on those targeted standards and concepts. Fourth grade, I think, is a great example of where you could see that work play out, where TDAs, which Dr. Johnston talked about earlier, this text-dependent analysis of some of which are traditionally some of the hardest concepts and the lowest performing areas on the PSSA. That was something that had been difficult for our fourth grade students in previous years. The fourth grade team, with support of coaches and specialists last year, really took a deep dive in that into that work, thinking about how to improve their instruction, how to emphasize that to kids, how to make sure that kids were prepared to do well. And that section of the PSSAs went from our relatively lowest performing section to actually our highest performing relative to the state, which really just has a nice sort of proof point of the work that can happen when we focus on a specific area of need using that data. Areas for growth, very similar to some of the district trends that Dr. Johnston shared, where results are up, but they are still below our pre-pandemic numbers, and below where we know our kids are capable of, right? We know our kids are just as smart and talented and hardworking as the kids who were sitting in those third, fourth, and fifth grade seats in 2018 and 2019. So we know they have the potential to achieve at those levels, and they're just not yet, for lots of understandable reasons. But that continues to to give our work some urgency and some purpose, that we know that there is more work to do. And then similarly, as Dr. Markle was talking about, seeing those gaps when we disaggregate that data, in particular by economic disadvantage. So some of our plans for this year is we're trying to tackle that by doing a couple things. The first thing is really, is we need to have a really solid approach to how we are doing strong targeted instruction tier 1 in the classroom. We have a talented team of specialists, we have reading specialists, we have math specialists, but we need to make sure that targeted small group instruction is happening in our classrooms at a really high level. One thing that we did to make this happen more consistently in math is we've traditionally had a time in our schedule for small group instruction in ELA in all of our grades, but we haven't had that in math. It's been a sort of more informal process that teachers aim to get to that small group time. And so this year, for the first time in third and fourth grade, we made a formal time in the schedule, separating that off from the daily instruction of the new lesson to say, here's this extra half an hour where you as a homeroom teacher should be working with small groups, targeting your instruction. And so we put a lot of time and effort at the start of the year to making sure those routines, those systems are up and running, teachers have what they need to pull that off, coaches and specialists are there to support them, because we know similar to what Dr. Markle shared about Enfield, the sooner we get those structures up and running and the more purposeful they are at that tier 1 level, that's going to make a big impact on students for both ELA and for math. The second thing we did was, as I mentioned, we have those strong systems around data days, looking at, at spreadsheets and charts and all those kinds of, all that kind of student data from PSSA and from STAR. But a structure that I wanted to bring that I had done previously is to build some extra time into to our teacher development time, to also have routines where teachers are bringing actual student work. So think essays, text-dependent responses, multi-step problems in math where students have to show their work, where teachers actually bring that work. They analyze it together with other colleagues on their team. They look for trends, they look for patterns. What are kids picking up? What are kids struggling with? How can we refine our instruction to help the kids who need it? So having that routine that happens on a regular basis to add to the data days is another way for teachers to have that time in the weeds to look at student learning to make them more effective than in their classroom. And then the final thing that we're doing a little bit differently this year is working with my assistant principal, Miss Mack. We're like dividing up like our roles a little bit differently, where each of us is focusing on specific grades to support with instructional leadership. So instead of each of us trying to think about all 3 grades and all 3 grades of ELA and math and all the standards and all the content, we're specializing where I'm taking 4th and 5th grade, Miss Mack is taking 3rd grade. And that allows us to just be in the weeds more with teachers to be able to make sure that we're in those team meetings, we're in those planning meetings, we're able to talk about the content and the instruction, and hopefully be more effective instructional leaders so we can help teachers be their most effective selves in front of kids. Any questions for me or for what we're doing at Erdenheim this year?
I do have a question in regards to the 3rd grade. When you look back at the original scores that were presented, the scores for 3rd grade were consistently low over the past, I guess it was 5 years that we saw. And so that transition from 2nd to 3rd grade, what may you be doing specifically to get at that? Do you think it's the test itself? Do you think that just getting at the format of it, taking a PSSA for the, at that level? I'm trying to figure out what might be done differently so that we can see something a little bit different in that 3rd grade, in that transition.
That's a great question. Thanks for asking that. Yeah, so I think 3rd grade, as you mentioned, I think has had the biggest drop that we have not yet bounced back from pre-pandemic, right? If you sort of look at like the gap between 2018, 2019, and now, like that is the biggest gap is 3rd grade for sure. So I think as Dr. Johnston said, I think this is something that we're sort of in a sort of like still in a sort of trying to figure out phase, right? And I do think it's a couple things, right? It definitely is the test is new for those kids in 3rd grade, but it's also new for kids everywhere across the state, right? So I think that's a part of it. I do think, like there is, I think we do a really nice job of that 2nd grade to 3rd grade handoff, but like, like, is it a little bit different handing off a cohort of kids from 2nd to 3rd than from 3rd to 4th when we're in the same building? Yeah, it is a little bit different, right? In terms of just like that, like continuity. And so I think for us, we're really thinking about just how we're making sure like those like instructional, all the supports that I have, that we're really sort of paying extra attention to how we're implementing these in 3rd grade too, like, right? Like, I'm sorry, how effective is guided reading off the start? How are we making sure that small group instruction time in math is like happening at a high level, making sure that, all those instructional like supports those teachers are in place, because we know that this is someplace where for one reason or another, things aren't sort of adding up as effectively as they are for those other grades. So as I'm sort of, and so like as I'm transitioning and like I'm sort of paying attention to sort of those things, I'm gonna sort of see what we're noticing. But I do think it really comes down to like if we sort of execute this play really well, I think we're gonna see results across the board. But I think hopefully, especially in 3rd grade, because we sort of have the most sort of like room to bounce back from where we were pre-pandemic.
Thank you very much, Mr. Spicer.
Any other
I do
questions for
think
me?
the one other thing that is unique about Springfield Township is not every elementary school has a point of transition between second and third. It is more unique to have a primary building in an intermediate school. And so I think you do have additional logistics that impact, I think, at third and sixth. I don't know if you would see the same if we were a K-3 school with a fourth bump, right? I don't know. I can't say that, but I do think it's worth noting that that's unique about us, that those two grades are also points of transition, and that's not true everywhere. Some schools are K-6. So I wonder sometimes about that impact as well, and what can we do to remediate that. And I think one of the things Dr. Markle said really effectively in a recent planning meeting was, how can she learn from what's happening to those children in third grade, and how might that inform some of the things we ask our second graders to do? Are there ways for us to boost the rigor in our K-2 school based on what we know in 3 to 5, right? So I think that's one of the things of having such a tight team of instructional leaders, where we're really looking at this like, what questions does this raise, not only for Mr. Spiker and his team who've had the children for a year, but for the school that had them likely for 3 years. Dr. Markle, did I catch that sort of what you had recommended?
Thank you.
Yes, you did exactly, because I think there's a piece of that, and that's why I think it is so important as we're looking at the data and looking when they leave us in second grade, what's the experience, and then what's our part to help with that too, for sure.
Thank you. Without further ado, I do want to move it to our secondary program, and I'm going to introduce, proud to introduce Dr. Zach Fuller to speak about our middle school.
Hi, everybody. Good evening. It's nice to see you all. I know you all, including Ronan and Olivia. So hi, everybody. It's nice to see you. I'm going to go over some of what we've done at the middle school, what our results have been, and what our action steps are moving into the 2023-2024 school year. Looking back at this meeting last year, we talked about targeted planning. And so one of the things we did last year in both ELA and math was to think about, where are the high leverage standards and where are the high leverage things that we can focus on that unlock the other standards and performance for our students if we really focus on those, right? If you look at a standards document for any grade level, you're going to see a whole array of standards, right? And so you have to figure out, where do I focus my energy in order to unlock some of these other skills for students? I think we did a really nice job of that last year. One really nice example of that is the curriculum work that was done by our ELA department with our instructional coach, Ellen Fracassini. They really took a look at what are those core instructional standards at each grade level, and where should we focus our energy? One of those was TDA, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. We also looked at individualized data review and grouping students according to their data during our flex period. That was new for us last year in terms of actually building a time into the day to remediate students according to the assessment data that we had on them, and then engaging teachers in that review and the grouping of students in a purposeful way. And so we did reap some results from that. And then finally, we wanted to look at the testing experience for students. So, what is our messaging around the test? What are we telling students about the test, both at the administrative level and also at the classroom level? And so we did some work with our teachers about how to talk about the test, right? This is important. You can do it. We won't give up on you. Those kinds of messages about the test. And also from an administrative standpoint, we talked about the conditions that students are testing under. And so we really reviewed with students how to go about taking the test and what are the good test taking strategies. What are we allowed to see and how do we reward that for students? How do we give them food and drink so that they go into the testing situation on, more equal footing that's under our control. And then we also talked about transparency. Broadly, we shared the results of the assessments with our students and showed them, like, where do you fall? Where do these results fall when we compare ourselves to Wissahickon or Colonial or Upper Dublin or Cheltenham, right? The people around us. And is that where you want to be, right? And so we kind of engaged a little bit of their competitive spirit with some transparency around the test. And I think we saw some results there. So if we want to switch the slide. So our areas of strength, growth in ELA and growth in math, are pretty much we have preliminary future ready index data that comes to us through the value added system that the state uses to track student growth. And we have the highest possible ratings that you can have in ELA and math. It's out of a 100-point scale. We have 100 scores of 100 in both ELA and math in terms of student growth from last year to this last testing year, 2 years ago to this last year, which is, I think, a feather in our cap. And a testament to the work that our teachers did around identifying high leverage standards. One thing that I can say about both of those subject areas is that that growth applies across all subgroups of students at our school, from economically disadvantaged across the spectrum of race and ethnicity. All of our students are high-end meeting or exceeding growth expectations in ELA and math. All of those subgroups are. One example of that is in ELA, we have a TDA. We had a TDA initiative last year that I mentioned, where our 7th grade teachers took on TDA as their cause for the year with students. And they examined the rubric, they examined student work, they designed assessments, both formative and summative assessments around TDA. 2 years ago, 45% of our students got proficient or advanced scores on the TDA sections of the PSSA. Last year, 88% of our students who had that intervention got proficient or advanced. And so we pretty much blew the doors off of TDA because we decided to focus on it. In math, we see growth like that in probability and statistics. And we also, not quite as great, but we see significant growth in probability and statistics over time. And we also see it across subgroups. Our PSSA results in science, you saw some of our 8th grade PSSA results in science back when Dr. Johnston was presenting slides. They remain consistently high. We had a little dip post-pandemic, but we're returning to the performance that we're accustomed to in science. And so that's a really good thing for us to see. If you want to flip the slide. Our areas for growth. So while we have really strong growth in PSSA, in ELA and math, we have not yet gotten many of our students across the finish line, right? They're running like crazy. They're running as hard as they can, and they're doing their best, and they're working really hard, and so are our teachers. We haven't gotten quite across the finish line for them yet, and so our FRI data reflects that we're not yet meeting the expectations that we have for our students. So we're going to continue to strengthen some of those instructional strategies and work toward enhanced performance. My message to teachers has been, we cannot take our foot off the gas. We got really great growth last year. We've accelerated these students very quickly. We have to keep our foot on the gas and double down on the strategies that we know work in those high leverage instructional standards. Targeted instruction, we're going to take that TDA success we saw in 7th grade, and we are going to expand it across not only the other grades in ELA, but also the other grades in mathematics. Our math department has already come up with a departmental goal to focus on open-ended responses that illustrate student thinking about math. We're leveraging some of our instructional goals for teachers around building thinking classrooms in mathematics. So I've seen a lot of those come across my desk, and we are going to formatively and summatively assess open-ended responses across grades, across subjects at the middle school, because we believe that that kind of analysis unlocks potential for all the other different kinds of questions you can be asked on a test. If you can do that, it unlocks your ability to think about the subject matter. And then we're looking at achievement and growth, particularly with an eye to student with economic disadvantages. We want them to perform at the same level as their peers, but we want to double down on the idea that good teaching for students who are experiencing economic disadvantage is good teaching for all students. And so we want to apply some of those UDL strategies that we've been talking about. We have some ideas about how to collect data and how to manage our program around those UDL strategies as we're going out on our walkthroughs as an administrative team and providing feedback to teachers. So next slide. So our action steps, I'm trying to move this box with all your faces in it so I can read my own slides. So we have a team data focus. So we have a team structure at the middle school already. Our teachers meet regularly during the school day in both departments and grade level teams. And so what we're doing is shifting the focus of that teamwork. We shifted some of it last year. We're shifting it more this year to a data focus. We're looking at student work. We're looking at student rubrics. We're looking at student data from our assessments within our teams, and we're making instructional decisions about how to interact with students in the classroom based on that data. We're focusing on those open-ended responses. ELA is the TDA, math is the open-ended math constructed response. And then we're looking at some interventions. We have already been through our flex grouping for the school year, for the beginning of the school year. On October 18th, we had a half day. And the teachers on that day took a deep dive into student data in both ELA and math. And they used that data to examine where are students falling out in terms of their performance overall, but also in terms of those standards, and how can we group them together so that we can utilize our time in the most efficient way in working with students to address some of those deficits. So TDA, key ideas and details, have become a focus in ELA. I think I've done that one to death. And then we're piloting Freckle at our 6th grade. There was a question about what are we doing specifically to manage transition from one building to the next. In addition to looking at our 6th grade curriculum and making sure it's really tightly aligned to the state standards, which is something that Dr. Johnson and I have had a couple of conversations about. We're also looking to pilot. We've seen great success using a tool called Freckle in mathematics in 7th grade, which is aligned to our STAR assessment. And so when given choice and feedback, right, students can use this tool to sort of decide what their own direction is in terms of working towards standards that they need, that they have deficits in. So we've seen that used really effectively. We're going to try it with our 6th graders to see if we can manage the growth in 6th grade in the same way that we've been able to do it in 7th grade math. So that's the middle school, the data picture for the middle school for 2023, 2024. And I can answer any questions you have about any of that now. Okay, I'm going to mute myself. Thanks.
Thanks, Mr. Fuller. And last but absolutely never least, Dr. Rittenhouse is here to wrap it all up and talk with us about how things are going at the high school. Dr. Rittenhouse.
Hello, everybody. Next slide, please. Looking back, our action steps from last year, from the 2022-2023 school year. One thing we really focused on last year and this year was the testing experience, the conditions that students are taking tests here at the high school. With under the testing experience, that first slide with messaging, the administrative team is very involved in the administration of Keystones, and before each test, we would go in and have pre-test visits, obviously encouraging students, to do their very best. Those conditions, smaller test sites, snacks and drinks, and then same subject proctors, with if it's a science test, it's a science teacher, just to, kind of so that it makes the students more comfortable. As Zach mentioned, Mr. Fuller, Dr. Fuller, pardon me, mentioned, with transparency, talking to the students about the purpose of the test. The results are shared with family, the results are shared with staff, the result and students, the students' teachers to guide instruction, but also talking about that those scores go on to your transcripts, and it also is related to our school ranking. And that's Act 55. You look at that second slide, the scores are on the transcripts. Last year was the first year that we did that, meaning on that 2-page back-to-back transcript, which is a record of all 4 years here at the high school. Your scores are noted on the transcripts, and again, you see with the testing spirit, consistent messaging with all 3 tests, and also messaging with the staff, with the students about them doing their very best. Professional learning, engaging with the test, meaning the staff engaging with the test. The staff was able during some in-services to actually take miniature tests and then look at the results and kind of see what the test is like. We teach information related to the test, but we thought it would make sense for the staff to actually take the test and to engage the test and then to look at results. We're always looking to link standards, curriculum, and instruction together with keystones, but generally as a high school, the administrative, Dr. Johnston is as our curriculum leader for the district, and our curriculum leaders here at the high school have done a really nice job writing new curriculum that is over the summer. It can be during in-services, et cetera, and looking to see how we can tie all that together. And we always try to give some time at our in-services if there is a need for curriculum writing related to that. And obviously it turns into the, as it ties into the keystones. If you next slide, please. Areas of strength, keystone performance, our literature score, which literature scores, which are strong, went from 63 to 70%. Biology, and that is proficient in advanced. Biology has been steady for 4 years in that 65 to 68 range. I have my Navigator report here a couple of feet from me. I think that 5 year ago score was about 70%, 71%, but it's been steady for 4 years. And then algebra, and we'll talk, more about our algebra scores as the presentation goes. But an area of strength was our below basic numbers went from 38 to 23, and obviously below basic is the fourth of the 4 tiers. But when that 38 goes down to 23, those students move up into basic, and we were able to shrink that below basic in algebra. And to that point, Keystone, with the Keystone performance, that middle slide, I think in algebra, it's 18 to 20 students are close to being proficient, meaning they could be 1, 2, 3 correct additional questions from scoring proficient on the exam. And it's become a different equation, if you will, when they know that it's going to be part of their permanent record here at the high school after they graduate after their senior year. And we're trying to link that 9th and 10th grade conversation with a transcript senior year and targeting options for assisting students. And those options obviously are classroom driven, and that would be instruction in the classroom, particularly for those courses that students are taking that are Keystone specific courses, meaning they're in that course, and then at the end of the course they take the Keystone for the 3 areas. AP performance, we had a 94% participation rate, and we were very excited about that. And if you go down to accessibility, that's a very high participation rate. And we were very grateful to the school district and the school board of directors and Dr. Johnson and Dr. Yannicone's vision, where we pay for all the AP exams here at the high school, which eliminates a lot of different things. One, collecting money can be a challenge, but most importantly, every student has access to the AP. That 94, obviously we want to increase that, but it was in the 60s, then it was up in the 80s, 60s 2 years ago, into the 80s last year, 94% participation rate we were very happy with. And we received a silver medal from the College Board. And you can go on to advanced AP Central, if you will. I have that on my phone here. And there's 3 criteria to receive that silver medal. And it's bronze, silver, gold, and platinum. And we are very proud to have recognition for the first time. College culture is 40% or more of the graduating cohort takes at least one. College credit is another component. 25% or more of the graduating cohort scored a 3 or higher on at least one AP during high school. And then college optimization, 2% or more of the graduating cohort took 5 or more AP exams during high school, and at least one of those in 9th and 10th grade. And there's other rules too, but we were excited about that silver medal. We were able to outperform state and national averages, and I just talked about accessibility, and we were very excited that there was no financial strain for any student here. Areas for growth. Our literature, while steady and strong, are still below pre-pandemic levels. And you saw I think it was slide 12 or 13. Our algebra has decreased from 31% for a couple of years to 9, 10, and 10% the last 5 years. And that is obviously an area of concern. Our bio scores have been steady and just a bit under our pre-pandemic level. AP tests, areas for growth. We get individual average scores for each AP area, AP calculus or AP biology. And, we had several of our tests which were lower than previous years. So we want to make sure that we're getting up to, our kind of standard average here at the school, which we call the passing rate. Our participation rate is 94%. We would hope it's 100%. Certainly kids are sick that day. Or a kid would choose not to take the exam. But again, we were happy with that participation rate, obviously 94%, but shooting for 100. And we're always looking to increase access to AP courses so every student has an opportunity to take AP courses and, go for the gold. Hopefully, honor roll next year would be gold or platinum. And they were my areas for growth. Next slide, please. Action steps, interventions. We're looking to use expanded use of lunch and learn, for all areas. And we've really kind of hit the sweet spot with lunch and learn. And now we're looking to see what we can do with Keystone related interventions. And I've been talking to the 3 department heads here, talking about how can we use that 30 minutes of lunch and learn time. Typically, not typically, kids are scheduled into lunch and learn if they have a D or an F. And that's about 25% of our school at any given time. So that other 3/4 of the school would have some time where they're not required or scheduled to be in class with their teacher. They have 30 minutes for lunch and 30 minutes for lunch and learn. And we think there's a really great opportunity to use that with looking at how we can prepare students for the Keystones, for the AP, for SATs, for the pre-ACT, for the ACT, for the PSAT, and all those things. We talked a little bit about the bubbles, the bubble students, the Keystone test retakes to say, hey, you're 2, 3, 4 questions away. You can certainly retake those Keystone tests, particularly to increase your level of achievement. And then targeted classroom instruction, which you've heard at every level. We established data teams. We've had data teams, but we established more formal data teams and professional learning communities, or PLCs. We have 10 different ones here at the high school, but the Keystone data teams and PLCs are to explore results in the 3 areas and areas of need. And we had an excellent 75-minute benchmark, Linkit benchmark test training with Amber from Linkit, and that was 8 days ago, I guess, at our half day in service. And she did a great job. And in the Keystone specific, our 3 building leaders in the 3 areas and our biology, algebra, literature teachers all received training on how to use that benchmark Keystone testing. And there's certainly a lot of different options to do the pre, the mid, and the post test. And then as we start to implement that, we'll analyze performance and determine instructional needs. And then part of that Linkit and analysis too, they'll have opportunity at the half day in service next week, not only to use what they learned about benchmark Keystone testing, but also to further explore data. So thank you.
Questions for Dr. Rittenhouse? I know we have more than expired our time. Usually we like to hold our meetings to an hour, so I appreciate you hanging in there with us while we provide this overview for all of you. I just want to say one more time that I'm hoping that throughout all of our presentations and sharing information with you, that you see how we are really prioritizing the interconnection between assessment, curriculum, and instruction in order to meet the needs of all of our individual students, both at the most individual child, that child, how they are doing, as well as groups of students and across the district, yielding for improved performance over time. And so that's the last slide I have for you. I just wanted to sort of take any wrap-up questions, comments, or additional information that may be helpful to you in your work.
Well, first, I'd just like to applaud all of the principals and the whole team, administrative team, for all of the intense work that has been done to formulate all of this data, formulate the plan, focusing on strengths as well as areas of growth. So I do applaud everyone, and it's very, very detailed. And then my question is, will this information be available for the community?
Sure will. Dr. Yannicone, do you want to speak about your plan?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Hello, everyone. Our intention is to be able, in addition to having the recording of this meeting being made available on our website, to also include it in my fall newsletter, which will be coming out in a few weeks, to avail people the opportunity to link directly into the recording so they can watch the entire presentation. I think it's important for the community to have a clear awareness of where we are, where we've been, and where we're headed. And I really do appreciate this committee's educational expertise and focus. I was sharing with our administrative team today that we have a unique opportunity. I think it's unique that our committee members are all educational professionals. And so for the three of you to have volunteered to serve on this particular committee is both challenging for us as a team in a really good way, and also motivational and inspiring for us, because we look forward to getting your feedback in how we're looking at the data, where we're putting our emphasis, and really anything else that you think we should be considering. And I'll share just a few sort of summary pieces. I know we're over time, but just a few areas that you pointed out that we have discussed as a team. So as an example, one of you mentioned the third grade. And as we look at our data and performance, we know that on grade level and classroom assessments over the last few years, we have had students performing at about 80 to 83% proficiency on the smaller grade level one-to-one assessments and classroom-based assessments. And then when they've reached the third grade, we've seen a dip. It is common for third graders or the classes that are the first class in a school, the transitional classes, to have a lower performance than subsequent classes within that school as they become acclimated. And this is exacerbated in the third grade because, as Mr. Spiker mentioned, it's the first time they're ever sitting for a test of this gravity. So we understand that. But our conversation also referenced the fact that this third grade cohort, so the current fourth grade, they are the students who were most significantly impacted in their primary grades by the pandemic. Their kindergarten year was interrupted in March, which is significant. That last trimester was very different for them. Their first grade year was virtual at the start of the year, then 2 days a week, and finally 4 days a week that April. So significant interruption in their primary grades. And then while in second grade, they had a full year of 5-day-a-week instruction, they were still dealing with a fairly significant rate of illness and absence by students, families, and staff. And so this is the cohort that we are likely to see the most significant impact of the pandemic. And our work at Erdenheim over the next few years is to do everything we can do to close that gap in instructional strategies before they reach secondary school. And I know the team feels that at a visceral level. They really take that very seriously, just as similarly the students who are currently in the first years of the high school, from a social emotional perspective, they really had interruption in the kinds of educational training that is critical to children at that age group because their schooling was interrupted. So we're paying very close attention to national, state, and local trends in emerging from the pandemic where you're seeing challenges. And so, you know, I think for me, in summary, you know, what I want to be the takeaway for the committee is that we recognize that we're still emerging from the pandemic in many ways. We recognize that while we've seen some really significant growth in the last year in the performance of our students, that we have room to grow. We also recognize that we are unfortunately mirroring national trends in the disparities in subgroups, whether that's cohort subgroups by program, such as our English language learners, or rate by race or by socioeconomic status. And so we're doubling down on our instructional practices and training for the staff in all the areas that you pointed out. Dr. Etlin, you pointed out cultural competency, which is embedded, and social emotional learning, which is embedded within equitable practices and in our universal design for learning. These are all areas that we discuss and strategize on a regular basis. So the team is not, we're happy with the growth we've seen in the last year, but we're not satisfied. That's sort of how I would leave it in summary. And there's just one more thing I'd like to say, and I'll turn it back over to Dr. Johnston. Dr. Etlin, I think this is your last academic affairs meeting with us because you'll be stepping off the board in a month. And I just want to say personally that it's been a real joy to have somebody of your educational caliber as a member of this committee. You have really been a conscience and a voice for us that we're sorely going to miss. So thank you for everything you've done over the last 2 years.
Thank you very much as well.
Round of applause for Dr. Etlin.
We appreciate you, Dr. Etlin. We hope you'll still come and visit us at these meetings.
Oh, absolutely. I'm going to miss it.
Insight. I think you along with your colleagues bring a lot of insight and challenge, and we like preparing for that challenge because I think it helps us do our due diligence, knowing that you're holding us accountable and expecting us to be really thoughtful about the work that we do. It's important work, and we take it very seriously. So we appreciate the opportunity to be here with all of you this evening. Dr. Etlin, I will send you a summary of this evening's presentation along with the slides so that you all can review them. But I will give that to you in the next couple of days because I'm assuming that at our next board meeting, you'll have the opportunity to report out on this on our meeting today.
Okay, thanks again.
All right. Unless there's anything else, this concludes our meeting of our academic affairs this evening.
Thank you, everybody.
I appreciate your extra time. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.